Good morning. Welcome back. If this is your first time here, my name is Briggs. I'm the voice you always hear on this channel, World According to Briggs. This is something we do every Sunday. It's called Finding America, where I tell stories about people that I've met, who I've encountered in my travels, who I just know, and how they found their America. It's been pretty interesting, and I've been getting a lot of subscribers from it, and a lot of people seem to like it, so we're going to keep going with it. We tell these stories because everyone has a different story about how they found their America, how they ended up someplace. I've always found that very interesting. I mean, people, you know, you watch all the Hollywood movies, you read books, but sometimes the most interesting stories you'll ever hear, you just hear them from talking to people. You learn them from talking to people. That is something I've always done. I've always just been able to strike up a conversation with people, and I've learned that everyone wants to talk about themselves. Like they say, it's their favorite conversation. So today, I'm going to tell you about the spy I knew. Yeah, it's not a James Bond thing. I actually met and talked to a spy about a handful of times in my life. This was back when I was in the military, and I was at a place called Camp Roberts. I was in the regular Army, then I went to the National Guard, California National Guard for a while, and one of their big training facilities is called Camp Roberts. It's out by San Luis Obispo area, Central California, I guess it is. So there's a woman there named Frenchie. Her real name is Rolande, I believe. She's French, but they called her Frenchie. And she has a really long French name that I'm not even going to try to pronounce. Here it is right here. But she had married an American named Edmondson, Gene Edmondson. Eventually found her way to the United States. But her story is freaking amazing. If you've ever had one of those days where you think the world's against you and you just can't go on, and there's no way something's going to be fixed and your life's always going to suck. If you've ever had those moments, listen to this story and you will realize that you can endure so much more than you're probably going through right now. I say probably because I'm sure there's some horrific stories out there in the world that I don't know about. But this woman's life, it sounds like a fiction, a dramatic fiction based in World War II. This all happened. It's horrifying. And she tells this story when she would give these tours at the museum at Camp Roberts. And I have to tell you, the things she said was alarming, to say the least. I mean, I've been a comedian. I've seen some things. I've done some things. But it's pretty bad when me in a room full of guys that have, in most cases, seen combat and things like that, they're all, okay, that's how bad it gets, but I'm going to spare you some of those details. Anyway, so I met her at Camp Roberts, and her name was Frenchie, and that's what everyone knew about her. She was born about 100 miles north of Bordeaux, France. Right before World War II started, she had gone to Paris to get into medical school, and she was in pre-med when the Germans basically took over France and Paris, and they shut down her med school. So she was angry about this, and she stayed in Paris for a while, and it's occupied, and everything you do is kind of watched, and you can't leave the city without papers. So she convinces the Germans that she needs to go home to see her parents, and so they let her go. So she leaves Paris, but what she didn't tell them, she had met people from the French resistance, and she wanted to join them. So while she was supposedly down there near Normandy, Bordeaux, France, wherever it is, she decided she was going to go to training with them. So she does. She starts training with the French resistance and eventually works as a person who's recovering downed pilots. She gets all, I wouldn't say entrenched, but she kind of gets lent out to the British, to where she's helping them when a pilot goes down, trying to get them back to safety. Well, so that basically makes her part of the resistance, and she's kind of a spy. And if you don't know anything about spies, in the military during wartime, actually during any time, if you're a spy and you get captured, it's guaranteed death and probably a lot of torture and a lot of questioning. So as a spy, you know this going in. So all those guys that are Navy SEALs, hard dudes. Ranger, great. Green Berets, amazing people. They're all some of the best we had. But if you know what a spy is facing if they're captured, you realize they probably have more balls than all those people. Yeah, maybe not, but you know what I mean. A spy, most people think it's some kind of nerd that sits in there and looks at a computer or just, passes things back and forth. No, there's a lot of stress that goes with it. So the British decide they'd like her to come to Great Britain, which they sneak her over there, and they're going to train her to be a spy, which she does. And she had been doing different things for the French resistance prior to this. Uh, but this was actually when she first became an actual spy. She eventually goes to Great Britain and she gets the spy training and she parachutes back into France. Now, the reason they were so up on her is she was a very small and attractive, thin girl. And she really had the intestinal fortitude that it took to do this job. So they knew if they can get an attractive girl there, she can get in with the Germans and get all the information they need. That's exactly what she did. She ends up in Cherbourg, which isn't too far from Normandy, and she wants to, get a job at the local base, the German base, which she does. She ends up working in the food, department or whatever, like cafeteria type thing. But part of her job was getting the meals ready and getting them, sent out to the different bunkers around Normandy, right? So she knew something was going on in Normandy, but she would find out how many meals they were sending out there, and then she would give them to like a baker or something that was in town, and he would write them down, and he would tell the Americans and the British, well, this is how many soldiers they have there. They've supplied, meals for 2,000 people. She did this for months. So they keep having her come back for these debriefings, and each time she has to, have some excuse. She's going to go back and see her parents or something like that. Eventually, coming back from one of her debriefings, she gets captured and they figure out what she's doing. They put her in a concentration camp. And that's where it got ugly. I mean, she tells you during the tour, or she used to, what they did to her. You can imagine the worst things human beings can do to someone without killing them. They were doing them. And they were doing them to her and a lot of other people that got captured. It wasn't a good time. How she didn't go insane, I have no idea. And the worst part about it, when she would explain it to us during the tour, she was very matter of fact. Like she was explaining the working parts of a Ford engine. It was just, this is what it was. This is what they did to me. This is how many times they did it to me. And you got all these full-grown men that are in the military with their mouths just agape. I remember looking at some of the people, and she said things. They're all, you're like, oh my God. So, yeah, just imagine the worst things you can do to a woman. They were doing it to her. So anyway, so she ends up in a concentration camp. She ends up in a concentration camp in, I believe, I'm going to get this wrong. I think it might have been Austria. Or no, she ends up in Austria. Anyway, she's in a concentration camp someplace where she's working in a quarry. And she's just this little thing, and she's busting rocks. Well, 40 days later was D-Day. So it wasn't long after that, she was lucky enough to be liberated by the 65th U.S. Infantry. They came to the concentration camp, got her out there. She was one of the few people that was still in good enough shape, even though she'd lost like 25 pounds. That she could help them with what was going on. Most of the people were just laying on the ground and they couldn't even move. They'd been worked and starved, and it was just a horrible scene. And she said more than once they had to put the lie on people when they were going to bury in mass graves. And she said a couple times she was thrown out there, and there was all of a sudden someone opened up their eyes. So she'd have to drag them out of a pile of humans. Or ex-humans at that. It was just horrifying to hear her explain it to her, and what I read about her when I was at the thing. It was, it made me think everything I've gone through in my life is so minor, so irrelevant, and my life has been so easy compared to what happened to this woman. But it kept going. So after World War II, she ends up in Austria in this camp that they had for people that were displaced. Maybe her whole family was gone. She had no place to go. Basically, the war made her homeless. She eventually gets back to Paris, where she is working in some military building. I forget what it was. But she ends up meeting a pilot for the French military. And this is, years later in the 1950s. Well, the French at the time were well entrenched in Vietnam. If you don't know, before the Americans went to Vietnam, the French had been there for decades trying to turn it into a colony or whatever. And they were having problems with the different Vietnamese factions, and there was a war going on there before we got there. So she ends up marrying this man and eventually gets stationed in Vietnam. And she's in a city and all that. And she has a job. They have a baby. They have a baby boy, and she comes home from work one day, and the whoever they were fighting, the Vietnam whatever, firebombed her house, killing her son. So that's a bad day. It gets worse later on. She gets a telegram that her husband's been killed too. His whole squadron was shot down. So this woman has been through all that, and life is looking good. And life just has that habit of coming around and beating you down again. And she was beat to the floor by life. And in my opinion, it was just one of the, her life to this point, no one would have blamed her for ending it. Honestly, what she'd been through makes total sense to end it all now. She didn't. She makes her way back again to Paris. Well, she's wearing just the uniform she was wearing the day she went back, the day she found out her house was firebombed and her husband was dead. She basically, still wearing the same clothes, ends up back in Paris, eventually starts going to night school and working towards a nursing degree or getting the classes. I don't know if it was a degree back then or whatever. I don't want to insult anyone. But she eventually meets an American while she's working at the U.S. Embassy in Paris. And his name was Gene Advenson. Now, her and Gene date for a while, and that eventually turns into a marriage. And so now things are looking good. Well, while she was at the embassy, she meets future President Eisenhower. And they become friendly and talks to him all the time when he's in there. He was probably a general at the time, but, he wasn't the president of the United States yet. So she talks to him and they become friendly. And he always tells her, if you ever want to emigrate to the United States, let me know. I will get it taken care of. And she always kept that in the back of her mind. And, okay, maybe I will. Well, she marries Gene Admonson, and he's from Minnesota. Eventually, he's in the U.S. military, and they get stationed all over the place. And she eventually ends up in Fort Gordon, Georgia, which I've been there. Interesting place. It's near Savannah. But so she's at Fort Gordon, and she gets hit with cancer. So she has cancer now. She lost her first husband, lost her child, was tortured by the Germans, and now she has cancer. Again, it's at this time you probably just want to check out. Not Frenchie. She kept going. Now, at this point, I'm sure some of you are thinking this is all BS. Look her up. I'm going to give you her name down there. You just type that in. You could read everything I said is 100% true. It sounds fake. When she was telling the story, I thought she was making it up. She used to go to different things where she would talk to different organizations, the special forces units and stuff like that. And she's actually honorary Green Beret too. So that's interesting. But anyway, so she ends up at Fort Gordon with her husband, and she gets cancer. Well, she goes to Walter Reed Medical Center, which is the military's #1 hospital, and she's getting treatment and everything's going, and she's trying to get through this. Eisenhower shows up, and this is like in the 1950s. So it's right before or during his presidency. He shows up to check in on her because he remembered her. She thought it was amazing that he remembered her and actually went out of his way to come see her. And again, told her, if you ever want to come to the United States, let me know. Send me a letter. Get a hold of someone. And, if you want to become a citizen. She was living in the United States at this point. And of course, okay, whatever. Well, she survives cancer, and she does become a naturalized citizen, partially because she's married, and then she's there, and then I'm sure they pulled some strings because of who she was. So, they move around a little bit, but eventually they find their America in Paso Robles, California, which Paso Robles back then was nothing much. Now it's a beautiful place to live in California. Matter of fact, I think it's strange, but I know 4 professional athletes that moved there. One I went to high school with, one I played against in football in high school, and he eventually moved there. He died of cancer, sadly. But it's like, I know there's at least 6 other professional athletes or retired professional athletes that live in Paso Robles. So I guess just like any workplace, you start passing around, oh, this is a good place to move to. You should look into it. Anyway, so Paso Robles is a nice place. When I was at Fort Ord, it was right down the road, and it's right near Camp Roberts, down the road like 2 hours. So we'd go through there all the time when I was driving from Fort Ord down home to Los Angeles for a long weekend or whatever. It was like a 5-6 hour drive all the time. God, I forget. No, 7 hours was to San Francisco. I think it was about 5 hours we drove. And sometimes we'd drive down there on Friday afternoon after work, and we'd stay till Sunday night and drive back. And we just do this over and over. Me and my friends go down there and party at my mom's house. It was a good time. Not at her house, but the local bar scene or whatever. Hang out with friends. But yeah, in 1971, Jean retired, and that's where they decided to do it, in Paso Robles. And at some point, she decided to start volunteering at Camp Roberts. At this point, she has had a military commission and all this other stuff. So she had every right to be on that place, and they welcomed her. And she gave these tours. She, right now, to this day, as far as I know, it's been years since I've been there, but she has her own room at Camp Roberts. Like, you go to their museum, there's a whole room dedicated to Frenchie. She's no longer there. Sadly, she passed away in 97. I mean, she had a long life. I really didn't look up how she passed away. I'm sure it was just old age, natural causes. But she had her own room. Now, I also know there's a building named after her on Fort Bragg, which is Camp Liberty or Fort Liberty now in South Carolina, North Carolina, whatever. North Carolina. So, yeah, she did a lot, and you never hear about her. You hear that Marlene Dietrich was a spy, and there's all these people during World War II that are famous. And, you know, Mata Hari, everyone knows about that spy. But what this woman went through is freaking amazing. And the whole spy thing was because of her hatred for the Germans and what they were doing. That's the only reason she put her life on the line and put her everything, her future on the line, was because of what they were doing to people. She wanted it to end. Find it amazing. So yeah, that's the story of Frenchie. And yeah, it's just, that story, first time I heard it was probably early 90s. Yeah, 91, 92, something like that. It's always stuck in my head. What an amazing woman that she was. And, one of her biggest accomplishment was to keep going. So that's why I say, if you think you're having a rough way to go, you got bills, maybe you're in a bad relationship, maybe you're going through a divorce, it is nothing compared to what some other people do. And she's a perfect example of it. So, just pick yourself up and keep, what is that old saying? Keep on getting on. I think it's like from the 1970s. I think the Grateful Dead said it. But it's such an amazing story. So that's the story of Frenchie. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Now, as far as health updates for me, I'm getting better. After the stroke, in case the first time here, I did have a stroke, but things are better. Feeling great, feeling good. I'm going to survive. I'm not going to die this year. I promise you. What do we got? About 60 more days? Not even that. 45 more days? But yeah, everyone, I appreciate you hanging out and listening to this story. If you get a chance, look up Frenchie, read the story, just to find out it's true. Because I promise you, what I just told you, some of you are thinking I just BS through the whole thing. Nope, she's a real woman. All right, guys. Everybody have a great day. Be nice to each other.